Hi everybody, how's it going? In this video, we're going to be creating a Green Lantern inspired ring. This is something that goes way back for me, back when I was a child collecting comics back in the day. And I thought this would make an interesting object to model and texture. So I did some initial sketches after some research on the Green Lantern ring. And I found quite a few styles and variations of that object. So, but before I carry on, just make sure you have Node Wrangler enabled and LoopTools. Node Wrangler and LoopTools. So, as I was saying, I found a lot of variations in the ring, and I started off with the idea of modeling one of those that I found online, which is really nice. But as I kind of broke it down, it really wasn't working out very well. So I decided to sketch a concept ring of my own. So here's my sketch, which I've just brought in as a reference image into Blender. So just place that roughly in the center, and we'll carry on from there. And I should say that the intention was to model, something like this. I wasn't entirely sure how it would work out, just based on the profile sketch that I did. And the terrible, I have to say, top version of the ring sketch didn't work out very well, but that's fine. So my intention was to start off with this sketch and see where it goes. I think as I've found from my own experience anyway, is you start off with a goal, but then as you traverse that journey, the creative journey, it doesn't always work out the way you intended for whatever reason. So that happened in this case as well, and that's fine. So let's just bring in the top sketch, the terrible top sketch. I don't know what went wrong there. And place that, scale it down a little bit so it matches the top of the ring. Something like that. We only want these reference images visible in the orthographic views. So I've turned off perspective, as you can see on the right hand side there, for the reference image properties. So let's just place that in the middle, roughly something like that, because these aren't very accurate sketches. They're not very symmetrical. So, but they will help just to visualize bits and pieces. Let's turn on the selectable option there. Always nice, so we don't have to select the sketches by accident. There we go. So let's switch over to the top view. Now I started off modeling from the top, and I must have done this about 3 times to find a solution that worked. In fact, after the fact, I can think of another way to do this, which would have been quite cool, but I didn't have time to test that afterwards. So I'll start off with creating a circle. We'll edit that circle, so press tab to edit, select all the vertices or the edge, and then extrude, E to extrude, S for scale, and just bring that in. And you can see there, I've got face normals orientation turned on, and I've made that color green in the preference, red in the preferences, so I can see straight away if anything's facing the wrong way. So just flip the normals, just make sure you check your normals, otherwise that will cause problems further down the line when it comes to shading and rendering your materials. Cool, so let's add a loop cut with Control R, and right click once you've clicked to add one. That will leave it in the center. And we're going to just manipulate these vertices and place them. Now turn snapping on for vertex at the top there, and you can hold down the Control key and move your mouse pointer over any other vertex, and it will snap along that axis. So by pressing, for example, the green arrow there, hold down the Control key as I do that, and then it will snap wherever I point my mouse cursor at, which is cool. Let's move that one lined up there. Select this edge, press 2 on the keyboard at the top number rows to get to edge mode, and then extrude it on the x-axis, so EX, and something like that. Now with this edge loop, you can select with holding down the Alt key and clicking it. We'll just scale that down a little bit. And going into the bevel, we're just going to add a bit of a bevel to this edge loop so we get this thin ring of faces, and then use the extrude tool. Now I'm using the tools on the left hand side. I don't normally do that. I only do it sometimes in the video just to show you what the tools do, but I do encourage you to learn the keyboard shortcuts. So bevel is Control B and extrude is E. Use those all the time, so it's good to know those shortcuts. So with those edge loops selected, we just made that extrusion. I set the shape to 1 and segments to 2. And again, I'm using the bevel tool. You don't have to do that. And just pull those out a little bit to create adjacent supporting edge loops. So we've got edge loops either side of those edges now. And that will really help us when we add the subdivision surface modifier to tighten up and make those edges sharp but slightly rounded, which really helps to capture the light. So I'm going to select this vertex here, and usually you can hold down Shift Control B, and that will bevel vertices. Now, for some reason, it's not showing up correctly there. So I will switch to the bevel options that popped up in the lower left, switch it to vertices, and change the shape value and the width to something that's going to give you some supporting geometry there in that corner. So something like that is good. We've still got some quads going on there, and you'll notice around that corner, those faces adjacent to it are no longer quads. They've got more than 4 sides. So we'll have to fix that in a moment. Let's add another couple of edge loops here. And the reason we're doing that is so that we can actually fix these. But before we do that, I decided to delete half of the object so we can use the mirror modifier and save ourselves a lot of work. So switch into edit mode, vertices, select each half, bottom and top, side and top, side and bottom, and delete those, add a mirror modifier, and then add the subdivision surface modifier beneath that. And we get something like that, which is actually not looking too bad. So now we're going to fix these multiple-sided faces. You don't have to always fix these, actually. I'm doing that. You don't have to. As long as it looks good, the result is fine. There's no glitches in the model. You probably don't need to do that. So I'm going to do that. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting these edges and then subdividing them. So select an edge, right-click, and select subdivide. And I'm putting 2 subdivisions in there. Now I can just select these 2 vertices, press J to join, and that will create new edges and new faces. You can see those are now quads, which is what we want. We can do the same on the other side. So select these 2 vertices, hold down Shift as you select them, click once, hold down Shift, select the other one, press J. Now we've got quads there as well. That leaves us with this one here. We need to make more sharp. So you can see there the Shift Control B actually worked this time. So we'll just change the shape to 1 to make sure we get a corner and make that a little bit smaller. Something like that is good. We don't want these corners super sharp. I just want them to be slightly rounded. I'm trying to think about the size of the ring. It's not a large object. So the tolerances for creating this would have been quite, being what they are. You don't want to have razor sharp edges. I'll come back onto that later on because there's a few decisions I made based on the fact that thinking about the context of the object, right? And what I mean by that is this is an alien ring. It's not a Earth man-made material or came from the world that we know. So I tried to bear that in mind in the materials. And that's one reason I didn't go for a grungy, beat up ring. It would have looked lovely actually, but the material in my mind would be much more durable, less susceptible to scratches and wear, as it were. So for that reason, I kept the materials quite clean. I think that worked out quite well. I think it was fitting for this particular project. But that's just my option, my opinion at this point. If you want to do something different, go for it. I would love to make a battle-worn ring version of this, actually. I think that would look really nice. So if you want to do that, by all means dabble and have some fun with it. So let's just finally finish off these vertices here, join them together, and we create these quads. So we've got some nice clean geometry there now. But it's good enough anyway. That's looking really nice. Nice shape. So, as I often do, I will pivot around at certain points just to analyze and review the shading and the model. It's good practice to do that, just to make sure if you can spot any glitches, fix those and move on to the next stage. So I've applied the mirror modifier at this point, and we're going to go back into edit mode. Select this inner edge loop by holding down the Alt key and clicking it, and press E to extrude, and then immediately press S for scale. And we're going to create the crevice, basically the hole where, I don't know what it is in the middle, to be honest. I just called it a crystal. It could be a glass thing. It could be nothing at all, actually. I don't know what it is, but I called it a crystal. It's like a little lens shape, squash sphere, basically, made of some sort of glass material. Again, a creative license. So with that done, I've moved it down to give it a bit of a slope, and I've selected the edge that we've got there now. And again, we'll just bevel that just to give it some supporting edge loops. And that will help with the modifier. Once we turn that back on, we get this lovely looking shape. So again, selecting that ring, edge loop there, press E to extrude, Z for the Z axis, bring it straight down, and we'll select the same edge loop again and apply the bevel modifier to that as well. So in this case, I'm pressing Ctrl B, and then just bringing that out a little bit. Here are the options, and that's fine. And there you go, looking quite nice. So what I've noticed here is there's a slight curvature to some of the these lines that go from left to right and up and down. So we need a few more supporting edge loops. So just press Ctrl R to add an edge loop and just click and drag that closer to the corners. That makes that much straighter. Yeah, you don't have to do this, just something that I wanted to do. So with that done, I'd rather not do that everywhere again manually. So I'm going to delete the side and the bottom half, add a mirror modifier, bring that above the subdivision surface modifier, and mirror it in the X and the Y, and of course turn on clipping, very important. And with that done, we can apply it. Probably. There we go. So that's our shape. Again, a final look at to see if everything's okay. So we'll select these outer edges now. I didn't apply the mirror modifier just yet. So I'm going to select these outer edges. So hold down Alt click and then Shift Alt click to select more. And then bring those down on the Z axis by extruding them. We'll select these edges again. And with those selected, we're going to do a Ctrl B, of course. So there you go, beveled those edges as well. That's looking quite nice. Now it got a little bit tight here for space in that corner. So I'm going to switch to edit mode and then vertex mode. Select these two here. Then just move them away, give it a bit more breathing space. Something like that is good. By the way, if you're wondering why, in fact, before I do that, let's switch to madcap mode. And again, this is a good way of just checking your topology and seeing how the light works on your model. Let's drag that circle out that we initially made and create a new collection. I'm going to call it ring and rename this to something like ring top. I can't call it top because the reference image, the sketch, is called top. Let's apply the mirror modifier again. I might do this a few times actually, you probably will notice that. I'll turn the wireframe on. In fact, I shouldn't have done that because when you're in edit mode, you can see the wireframe anyway. I'm going to select, I'm going to edge mode. And you see these little dimples, I guess? These are actually rings that go around the inner slope of that recess. So what I'm going to do now is just reuse, well, we're going to add a control loop cuts to that slope. So Control R, click once, use your mouse wheel to increase or decrease the number of cuts. And then we're going to, with that done, we can hit Control B to bevel that. And we get this. And with those selected, we can do Alt E, and that we can extrude these faces along their normals. So I want these to come out just a little bit. So you can see they're following the normals of these faces, which is what we want. Something like that. So we've got these very small, thin rings effectively inside. Now at the moment, these rings are still part of the original geometry, of course. They're actually attached to that slope element. By the way, cavity in the options here is what makes this look slightly shaded and with highlights that are more pronounced. So if you want to see what I see, just turn on the cavity and make sure it's turned on to both, not just world or screen. And that will give you this look in your viewport. I find it helps to visualize the model better. So as I said, these are still attached to that slope. So what we can do is we can actually get rid of these faces here, either side of these little rings. And we'll just delete those. Make sure I've got those nicely, and then delete faces. And now we have this hole. And switch to edge mode. Alt left click, Shift Alt click, and then right click to bridge edge loops. And that gives us a straight face along there. Of course, those rings now are separated and no longer attached to that part of the face. They are looking very round at the moment, which is what we don't want. So let's switch off the subdiv. And we'll select these edge loops that go all the way around. At some point, I kind of wanted to hide these and check at the back that there aren't any faces there. There shouldn't be, but I wasn't convinced. I wanted to just double check. But anyway, let's select these edge loops. Again, Alt click and Shift Alt click, and we'll bevel those just a little bit. So again, segments to shape 1. That will give you adjacent edge loops. And with the subdivision surface on, we've got these lovely sharp, well, relatively sharp edges and defined rings inside that slope area. So I'm really happy with that. Now we've got this crystal thing in the middle where the energy comes out of, or when Green Lantern does his thing. This is where the beams come out, the green beams. So I'm going to add a round cube. If you haven't got that option, go to Preferences and enable Extra Objects under Mesh and in the add-ons. It comes with Blender, it's all built in. So we're going to add a round cube. So it's all quad based. And scale it roughly just shy of that hole there. Obviously, we don't want it to be completely round. So we'll squash that in the, or scale it in the Z-axis in a moment. Now we're in object mode here, so bear that in mind. If you're editing in object mode, like scaling and stuff, you have to apply the transforms, especially with scale. Don't apply the rotations, but the scale, for this anyway, has to be applied, but I'll do that later. I think one division for subdiv is fine. Yeah, that looks high detailed enough. Now, of course, this is just my interpretation of the ring and that part there. This can be whatever you want it to be. It could be flat with some sort of texture on it. It could be more crystallized with these flat facets that go across the ring. Like I think that would look quite cool, actually. In hindsight, I probably should have done that. It would look much nicer than just a sphere that's been squashed. So what I've done here now is added a cylinder. It's got 32 vertices, rotated it on the x-axis so it's facing us. We're just going to scale this up to roughly that part of the ring just there, the inner circle. So let's just bring the depth down or up. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, because we're going to apply a mirror modifier to this, so we only model half of it and save ourselves some time. So I'm going to rename that cylinder to ring base, or band, should I say, ring band. Switch to X-ray mode. And before we work on that, let's just make sure these are all, there you go, that's the scale, it hasn't been applied. So press Ctrl A and apply the scale to make sure that's 111. You can also apply it in the menu just there. But Ctrl A will bring up that menu. I'm going to select these objects and just move them up above the cylinder. But before I do that, actually, I'm going to select these faces here. So in X-ray mode, click and drag, and you select both the front and the back face. Snap back to front view with the one on the numpad. Press I to inset. This would be the thickness of the ring, effectively. So now we've got this. Let's turn X-ray off. And we can select bridge faces, and that will create a nice tube shape for us. Right, with that done, I'm going to add an edge loop. So Ctrl R, click and right click to leave it in the center. And we'll select these top vertices. Make sure you do it in wireframe or X-ray mode to select all the vertices on top and bottom. I forgot to add a inner edge loop as well. Let's do that again. There we go. Select those and delete them. And now we've got half the tube. Add the mirror modifier. Now you notice it's not quite working because, again, we've got a rotation on this. So let's apply the rotation in this case. We don't need that rotation on there really. And now the mirror modifier will work on the y-axis. Again, make sure you turn on clipping. And we'll select that back edge, the outer one. Switch to front view. Make sure you're on medium point. And then we'll scale that up. Something like that. So basically that becomes fatter on the outside than on the outer edge. And we'll add a couple of edge loops here. Ctrl R, scroll your wheel, right click to leave them as where were created. I'm just going to create a slightly curved profile. So select each edge loop with Alt-click, S for scale, and bring those up, something like that. So you basically got this kind of tire shape in its basic form. Right-click to shade smooth, switch over to the data properties and switch auto smooth on. It doesn't always work auto smooth depending on the angle and the object, and you don't always need it depending on the topology. But for this, it worked quite well. Now let's bring these up finally. So one on the numpad, switch to front view. You can see the sketch, and something around there will do just nicely. Let's add a subdivision surface modifier to the ring base. Now these edges on this side need to be beveled again. We need some supporting edge loops. So Alt-click, Shift Alt-click, Control-B to bevel. Segments to shape 1, remember, that's very important. And with that done, that looks much, much better now. So the top part of the ring needs to extrude downwards and follow that profile of the sketch that I did. And my intention was always to have the top part almost as a separate part to the ring band. But that's not how it turned out, as you can probably see from the render. So I selected these edges and brought them down just above the ring. We're thinking about how to do this because we have to have this flow around and follow the shape of the ring band. But at the same time, we've got all these vertices and edges that we need to manipulate. So let's move these down a little bit more. Something like that. So once again, I'm going to delete half of the top part. Use a mirror modifier again. And the reason I'm doing this on and off is because sometimes you need to be using the whole model to manipulate things. Other times you need just to manipulate a quarter of it or half of it. So what I want to do is I want to select all of these vertices at the bottom edge and put them all in a straight line, equally divided. Right? Sounds a bit crazy, right? But there's a good reason why I've done this, because the top profile, which has the ring shape of the ring, the lantern effectively, we want to keep that, but we want it to transform and transition into this flat edge, which we can then marry with the ring band. So let's just space out some of these vertices. And with that done, I'm going to S for scale, X 0, and that will just flatten them all out in the X axis. And then snap these to there. Not quite there yet. So let's snap them to this one first, and then select this one on the end, snap it to there. Just like that. So now we've got a straight line that transitions from the top to bottom, as you can see there. It's quite an interesting shape to do. Let's do the same for the side. Now, of course, these are already flat, so I've selected these edges here. Press Shift D to duplicate them and move them out a little bit. And what I want to do now is select all of these vertices and dissolve them. So Control Delete will dissolve those. Now we've got just one edge. Now I'm counting how many cuts we have along that side, and we've got 4. And that will be perfectly divided now into 5 parts. So all I need to do now is select these and then snap them to vertices by clicking on the X-axis arrow. So select the vertices, click the arrow, hold down Control, move your mouse pointer there, and snap. Keep doing that, you get into the habit of doing this. So I want to make sure these are evenly divided, which is why I'm doing this. And this part here, I will leave the top alone, just move the one at the bottom. Because we want to keep that top corner sharp. Let's space out some of these at the top now, because they're looking a little bit weird now that we've made those edits. So let's bring that in. Now you can slide these vertices on the existing edges by hitting GG. So press G twice, and you can slide them along the edges. Really nice feature. Let's line them up to something a bit more tidy. This will help with shading, by the way, so give or take. So the tidier your model is, your topology is, the better. Now you've used that edge, we can delete it. So I want to select it and delete that edge. We don't need that anymore. And we'll do the same thing again here on the side. So we've got a lot more cuts here. I think it was about, I don't know, 10, 8 or 9. So select those lower edges, Shift D to duplicate them, move them out, switch to vertex mode by pressing 1 on the keypad, on the top row numbers, and we'll dissolve those with Control Delete. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So go back to the edge mode, select that edge, right click, subdivide, and select 10 cuts. Sorry if I'm going a bit fast on this stuff, but you can feel free to pause the video, tap back a few seconds, and then rewatch it. Same as before, select these lower vertices, not the top ones now, and just snap them to the corresponding ones at the bottom. Now we know they're perfectly spaced out. You can see we've got some overlapping vertices there already, but that's okay, we can easily fix those in a second. Let's get these ones out of the way, give us some more space. That's the wrong one. There we go, that's the one. And bring that there. There, that's much better now. We've got a much nicer transition from the top to that base. So with that done, select that edge we created. We don't need it anymore. Now I was going to delete it, but I thought just in case I need it for something, I'll separate it by pressing P, and that becomes its own object. And we'll just turn that off, so we can't select it, see it, or render it. It won't render anyway because it's just an edge. And let's turn on wireframe to see how much geometry we have on the ring band. There's a reason why we need to see that, because we're going to use face snapping now, not vertex snapping. I found that was a nice way to, we want to get that circular profile, that slightly curved profile on those bottom vertices there. So I'll select these one at a time. And I'm going to put the 3D cursor there with Shift S. And we're going to select all of these vertices here and switch to the 3D cursor as our manipulation origin point. And we're going to scale these on the X-axis. It's probably easier to do it on the front view. So hit 1 on the numpad and scale them out. So if they were brought down, they'd hit roughly where the sketch is indicating. So something like that there. So again, just select those and make sure you only scale it in the X-axis, not the Y, because that will then make it much wider and broader than the ring itself. So now we're going to just move these down as close as we can, roughly, to that curve. Just eyeball it at this point. So select these vertices, click the blue arrow, which is the Z-axis, move them down. Just like that. Now this would work actually. You can actually do this, that's fine. You can leave it as a separate object. As the final result, I feel. So I'll switch back to face, I set to face snapping now, not vertex snapping. And what we're going to do is we're going to select each point, each vertex, click the blue arrow. Well, firstly, we're going to do this one first on the x-axis. Hold down Control as you move it, and that will snap wherever the nearest face under your mouse pointer. Let's move that on the... So we're snapping these under the z-axis now, just like that. Let's snap that one across. You may have to move your mouse cursor a little bit back and forth sometimes just to get it to snap, just like that. So remember, click the axis, hold down Control as you move it, and then do the same thing for each of those vertices. Very tedious, I'm afraid, but at least now we've got this nice curved profile, which fits perfectly with that band. Now, you could leave it like that, to be honest. It's fine, and work on the band separately if that's what you want to do. I just want to say that with these kind of, I'll put in quotes, tutorials, you don't have to follow them precisely to the letter because, you know, it can be, I don't feel like you will learn anything just by copying the exact same steps. Sure, if that's what you want, if you want the same result, fair enough, but there may be other ways to do it. So the point of these, I guess, tutorials is to learn about the features of Blender and the editing tools available to you, as well as the add-ons. So if you can find another way to apply what you've learned perhaps somewhere else to this tutorial, by all means go ahead and do that. So, and also what you've learned here, you can take away and use somewhere else. So it's not about the ring as such, it's more about learning how to use Blender. So with that done, I've selected these bottom edges, switch to edit mode, and I've selected the spin tool, and we'll switch the axis in the front view so it matches our view. We want to spin that around the 3D cursor, which we've put back in the center of the world. So I went a bit faster because I was talking over the top, but you get the idea. You can see already that this isn't exactly how I started out with the sketch, because I didn't straighten those edges and rotate them to face the center of the ring. That would have given us a perfectly kind of flat edge 90-degree angle at the bottom of that ring base. But I like this result actually. I think it was quite nice that they kind of had this slant and taper to them. So just figuring out how many cuts to make. We don't want too many. 10's pretty good. So let's go with that. Perhaps bring those a little bit closer. Again, it's up to you. These are just my choices. So let's have a quick look at that in object mode. So now we've got this top part that we created, which transitions really well into the lower part. So with that, select the inner edge, hold down Alt click and scale it down, but only scale it in the, well, I think the X-axis. So you can hold down S and then Shift X. Not Shift X, sorry. Shift Y to leave out the Y axis. So now we've got some thickness to our ring. Turn subdiv back on and just have a look at and see if that works for us. I think that's looking pretty good. So it's not quite perfectly round, and in this instance it doesn't have to be perfectly round. I mean, it's going to be quite difficult to follow that ring. You can see that, notice the bottom part is not round, you know, perfectly round either, but that's fine. So I want to switch to vertex mode with X-ray on, select each of these vertices, just move them up so they roughly match the profile of the initial or original ring base. As always, do what you feel looks good. You don't have to follow what I'm doing exactly. This is all about learning. something like that is I'm happy with. Now, I didn't do the same with the lower part of the ring. I didn't feel there's any need for that. It looks fine as it is. Really happy with that shape. So again, referring back to the sketch, this is not what I sketched exactly. And as I say, that's absolutely fine. This is what designers do. They, you start off with one objective, and as you work on it, you find that for whatever reason, it didn't work out the way you wanted, so you make adjustments and you pivot. That's perfectly normal. So selected that edge loop there and just extruded it and moved it on the y-axis. And of course, the mirror modifier will snap it to the center because we have clipping on to fill that inner ring. And with this edge ring here on the end, we select the loop, almost a loop. I've just counted how many subdivisions we have there at the bottom because we need to mirror that in the inner space as well. So we'll subdivide that again. It'll become clear why in a second. And of course, it's going to be 10 as it was before. So with that done, let's switch off the subdiv. Add some loop cuts. So put in 10 there. So now it matches the number of cuts along the closing edges as well. I could have just selected these 2 at a time and press J to join them. But I thought in this case, let's delete that face. I'd forgotten actually the mirror modifiers on here, so I turned it off because I can't just select what I wanted to do. So I'm going to select these edges here, apart from that one. So I'll select that edge, press E to extrude. Press X to constrain it to the X-axis, and we can use snapping there. The snapping has to be set to vertex snapping, of course. And that will snap to there. But of course, in that corner right there, we've got 2 vertices on top of each other. So select those to make sure in wireframe mode or X-ray mode, and press M to merge at center. And now you can see that's just one vertex, not 2 separate vertices. So we've got to do the same for the bottom part now. So we'll select this face. There's so many ways to do this, and it's just what I chose to do. So click the first edge, hold down Control to click the last edge, and then I'm going to snap these to here. Go to wireframe, vertex mode, select these 2, press M to merge at center, and again, double check that's one vertex, which it is. Now we can turn back on our, well, in a moment, we'll fill that. So select that edge and press F to fill. What you can also do is select these 2 edges like that and bridge edge loops. That will create the fill for you. Let's turn on the mirror modifier and the subdiv back on. Now we have this rather nice shape. Let's give it a quick look under matte caps. Matte caps. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Right, let's add an edge loop with Control R in the middle there. We'll set our pivot manipulation point as the 3D cursor. We'll switch to front view, and we only want to scale this on the X-axis because we can now get this flowing curve from top to bottom, a much neater transition into the ring base. And again, remember the sketch I did it didn't have a curved shape like this. It just had a straight, almost like a pyramid shape with the top lobbed off. So this is where I am now, and I like the result. So now we're going to think about beveling these edges here to create a harder edge. A little bit more tricky because we have a lot of other geometry to think about. So select all the edges that we need to bevel. So we've got this ring, that ring, and the lower part of the ring, and then just Control B. Shape 1, segments 2. That will add some supporting edge loops around those edges that we selected. Now we need to go and inspect this closely because there may be some issues here and there where there may be some overlapping bits, or it's a little bit more fiddly. So I'm trying to figure out how big should these bevels be. As you can see in that corner there where it meets the top part, transitions in, we'll probably come back and fix that. That bit here may be a problem. So let's select that vertex and slide it along by pressing GG along that axis, or that edge. Switch back to medium point. You can see that vertex is not lined up with the one just below that. So we've got a bit more work to do here to tidy these up. So I'm going to snap that along the y-axis. So select the y-axis, hold down Control and snap it. We'll do the same for these, so they're again lined up, all the same loop, same line of edges. But of course that means the ones at the top are slightly outwards now, bulging outwards compared to that one. So we need to select all of these. And what I've done there is I've pressed the C key, C for Charlie, and that will create a brush effectively. So we can select these vertices. I just noticed I selected one extra at the top there, which I should not have done. But anyway, you want to snap it to this one, somewhere around there. Yep, something like that. So now they're kind of flush together. Let's turn on subdiv, and now you can see we've got much more definition now on that ring edge, which is quite nice. Let's just check that in matcaps, not madcaps, as I said before. I think that's looking pretty cool. So let's add some more detail. Let's select these face loops. And by doing that, we've got this odd selection. So switch to wireframe mode. Press the C key to bring up the brush, and we can use the middle mouse button, hold that down, and just drag over the faces we don't want to select. So just paint those out from the selection. So we end up with something like that. We don't want these ones at the very top on the lip, on the top part. So hold down Shift and click these. And then we've got those parts there, which is fine. Again, do what you feel you want to do here. It doesn't have to be the same as mine or this version. With those selected, press Shift D to copy them, and then P to break them out into a separate object. So now we've got these parts separated out. Turn subdiv back on, and you can see we've got some problems. So first of all, let's make that thicker. So add a solidify modifier. Let's figure out which way it's going. So let's change the offset to 1. Even thickness is on, and just change the thickness to something that you feel works. That might be a little bit too thick, bearing in mind it's a ring. Don't want it to chaff against the finger next to it. So bring that down a little bit. Something like that. Some nice detail. We've got some shading issues at the top there. We'll fix those. Let's give it a quick inspection. You can see there we've got some shading issues. So it's not that straightforward just yet. Let's move the solidify modifier above the subdiv. You can see immediately that makes a massive difference. So remember what we've learned from this is the order of the modifiers makes a huge difference. I've turned the mirror modifier off, applied the solidify modifier, and now we've got this split down the middle, which we don't want. That's because it's created faces in the center. So I'm just going to isolate this object and select these faces in the center there. Now I did select an edge, the face loop, but I don't want it, so I'm going to hold down, click once, hold down Control, and then hold down Control as you click downwards. That will add these faces to the selection. Or just click them one at a time, holding down Shift. With that done, press X to delete, or press the delete key and delete the faces. And we've got a slight gap there. Not sure why that happened. So go to the side view, select these center vertices, press S, Y, and then 0, enter. So S, Y, 0, enter. That will flatten them all out on the Y axis. You can see there, the mirror modifier is clipping those to the center. Now we have a complete object again. That's looking better. Still a little bit more work to do, not much, just a little bit. I need to bevel these edges again, so switch to edge mode. Let's select the edges we want to bevel. It's important you check you have the right selections here, because if you miss one and then carry on, it's going to be a lot more difficult to fix it later on. Well, not difficult, just more tedious. So I'm going to make sure I have everything I need selected. Now I'm clicking here, but it doesn't seem to select. I think there's a bug in 3.4 Blender. I've noticed that a lot recently, even in 3.3, I think. I'm clicking on something and it doesn't select, so I've got to move my view, then it works again. It's a recent issue that I've discovered. I don't know why that's happening. Could be just my system, I don't know. So with those edges selected, I'm looking for a good angle so I can get a good view of what's going on. So we'll click and drag this. You can see we don't want to go too crazy here because we've got a lot of low tolerances in those corners. We'll just zoom in here and see what's going on there. That looks okay actually, not too bad. Let's turn subdiv back on. That's not looking too bad, I think. That seems to work okay. But you can see here the top part is almost disappearing into the ring base, or the ring. So we need to pull these vertices out a little bit. So I'm going to switch to X-ray mode in the front view and select these and just move them. But I want to see at the same time the 3D model. So I'm going to switch to a new panel, create a new panel, just pivot the camera around my view there, not the camera, my view, so I can see how far that's going out as I move it on the left side, the left window. So there we go. So as I'm doing that, I'm keeping my eye on the right panel. I'm just shy of the surface, which is good. No intersecting. If there is a little bit, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to notice it from a distance. So let's join these areas back together now. So you notice the red part seeping through the gap there. Like I say, that's because I have the face orientation turned on in the options. And I've made that red. So I'm going to hide the crystal for a second and close this hole that we have in the top, which we made at the very beginning of the video. So we'll select this lower edge loop, edge ring. So in solid mode, probably turn off the subdivision surface modifier as well. Again, we've got the mirror modifier. So again, we need to apply that again. Turn off the subdiv so we can actually select that bottom edge loop. Press F to fill it, then press I to inset, create new faces. In fact, bevel first. Let's just create a bevel there and use the mouse wheel to have more cuts as we bevel that corner. And the shape we want to put back to 0.5. That will give it a much more organic, rounded transition. Let's tweak that size a little bit. Trying to keep the same size polygons either side of that bevel, give or take. So with that done, let's have a look at that. Of course, we can't see the red anymore because we've closed that hole that was in the ring. After all of that placement at the beginning, I'm going to bring that down a little bit more so it's not protruding from the top of the ring as much. So what I'm doing now is just adding, let's switch to a HDRI there in our viewports. Just adding some basic material applications to the rings, so we've got some different shapes to play with later on. So let's start off with the ring itself, give that a nice green color. I bet you weren't expecting that, eh? A green for Green Lantern. And let's turn the roughness down. Doesn't really matter what we do at this point. This is just temporary materials, just so we can visually block out parts of the ring. And of course, there's not that much to it because we only have a few components. So let's select that and add it to the little band, duplicate it, call it ring decor or whatever you like. And we'll make this like a very light grey, almost white, metallic look. These are very basic, it's just principled BSDF with metallic on and the roughness down. Let's change the roughness value. What I'm thinking here is because, again, thinking of alien materials. So I want to have a different roughness on that part, being a different material to the rest of the ring. There's method to my madness, guys. So the crystal itself, we select that and change the shader from principled BSDF to glass BSDF. That's looking quite nice. Now glass ideally needs to be white, not green. It needs to be white for it to actually work as proper glass, generally speaking. I'm sure there are exceptions to that rule. We're just blocking out the materials at this point. So you can see the glass is not very transparent now because the color has changed to a darker green or that green. So we'll change that, make it much brighter. Now that's starting to work again. So the brighter the color of the glass, the more transparent it becomes. If it was white, it would be crystal clear. I kind of like that frosted, foggy look in the crystal. So I'll try to do that in the materials later on. Right, moving on. Let's add a bit more decoration to these inner rings we created earlier. So switch to face mode and hover your mouse over them and press L to select them. L is for linked, by the way. And we'll apply the ring decor material that we created. Don't forget to hit the assign key And of course you do that in edit mode. That's looking really cool. We've got a bit more detail there now. So one thing I didn't intend on doing again is, I thought about it initially, but before we do this, let's make a copy of the ring and then hide it. Just do some renaming, make sure these are what they are. So we don't need the original bands we created, of course, because we have one piece now. I'm going to add a lattice. I don't often use these, but they're really handy, really great editing tools, modifiers to use. So I want to isolate this lattice around the top part of the ring. So just place it roughly like this. Don't forget to scale it on the y-axis as well. Just make it slightly broader, wider than the area you want to influence. And there's our lattice, and we'll make a few more cuts in the lattice. Because now you have this properties panel for it there. And that's all we need to do. So select the ring, add another modifier. Guess what it's called? Lattice. Yay! Use the eyedropper or the drop down. Select the lattice we just created. Now what I love about this is if you select these points on the lattice and edit them like that, they influence the shape within the lattice. That's a really cool effect. So let's select these points on the lattice here now. That's edit mode, by the way. And we'll click the, go to the move tool and just bring them down a little bit on the Z axis. Or Z. Z or Z, you decide. Select the corner ones now. Bring these down a little bit more so we get that slight curvature. So a quick inspection with matcaps. And it looks cool. Let's have a quick look at the rendered view. Remember the hole we had here at the bottom of the ring top. I'm going to hide the crystal and we're going to turn off the subdiv. I'm going to select this face in the middle we created earlier. Bring the crystal back. Move that down just a touch. Select this edge loop, medium point for the point of manipulation. Just round that off a little bit more. Doesn't really matter, to be honest. So let's select this face here, press I to inset, scale it down, and then move it down again. So we carry on this kind of bowl effect just inside there. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to apply a very bright emission material to that face there, which will represent the power in the ring effectively. And that will shine through the glass, make it hopefully stand out a little bit more interest. First of all, let's create a empty cube. Make sure it's centered in the middle of the ring. Make sure you scale it in the y-axis as well, actually. So it doesn't have to be, but it just helps to keep it quite tight. That's fine. Now we're going to select each of these objects, including the lattice, of course. Then lastly, click the empty we just created. Hit Ctrl P to parent it and keep transform. And now we've got the lattice. Whoa, sparkly. we can just manipulate the lattice, sorry, the empty cube to control our ring in one go. Let's select these faces here. And press I to inset, B for boundary, and that will snap it to that left edge. So something like that. And do it once more, because it really does help to have these supporting edge loops going around it. Again, this is just adding a bit more interest to the ring. And we'll hit Alt-E to extrude faces along normals. A little bit tricky this one because it's very close to the surface of the ring band itself. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. And that's looking pretty good. And we need to add some more supporting edge loops. So in edit mode, press Ctrl R, click, then drag, and bring it roughly somewhere there. So I'm making sure those are evenly spaced out in that corner. And do the same for the bottom part there. So Ctrl R, click, drag, and that's sharpened those corners a bit more. Now I did actually apply that energy emission shader I mentioned earlier to the below the crystal, and I don't know if I showed that for some reason, but sorry about that. So let's select these inner faces we've created. So select the first one, hold down Control, no, find the shortest way to that other polygon. With those selected, we're going to create another material called Ring Decor Inset and apply that to those faces. So here's our Ring Decor Inset material. And what I think I would do is copy the green from the other material. So apply that in there and just bring the darkness down. So we have a little bit more contrast. Slightly different material. So really we only have a handful of materials here, if that, for the whole thing. And also, how about we apply that to the inside of the ring, because it looks a bit boring, dare I say. So I'm going to click on the first one, hold down Control, click on the last one. That will create this ring or selection. Hold down Shift, click, and then Control, click. And that selects this nice ring of faces. We'll assign that material as well. Whoa. The energy, the power. Yeah, and that's looking really cool. I've noticed this part here has got a little bit of a dent sticking out. So let's fix that. Just want to bring these closer to the body really and space them out a little bit more basically. So we'll just work our way through that. A little bit fiddly, but persevere and you'll get this. This is quite cool. I try to do switch to normal, we want it to go that way, right? So you can click on the plus button there. And that will create a new selection type or transform orientation type. So we can use that just by selecting these edges and using that new orientation. That's a really great feature. So let's bring that up. I didn't really need to move these further down, those edges, because it's too close to the other one, and that's why it's causing this sharper corner with the subdiv turned on. You can also see it's clipping through the body a little bit there as well. So that's not going to work until we get those edges moved along. Let's turn off some modifiers so we can see what we're actually doing. bit better. So I'm going to select these edges here. Just thinking about how this is going to work. So you can see there's a slight bend there. Let's bring that in closer. Let's have a quick check. Still not quite there yet. You can still, it's a bit of an angle. So you can see there, there's a kind of sticking out. So I switch to edge mode, edit mode. Again, not really a big deal, but just wanted to tidy this up a little bit more. You can see they're kind of sticking out a little bit more, so I'm going to bring these in so it follows the curve a bit better. Still not quite right. And at this point, I think I realised I need to move these edges because they're way too close to the other edge. So with those selected, and don't forget the other side as well, the inside of the band, we're going to move those to roughly in the middle. And then bring that down. That's better. Could be better, but I think that's good enough. Let's move on. So these top corners here are perhaps a little bit too sharp. So with that selected, edit mode. Just want to work on these vertices here in the corner. Let's create the orientation that we want. So that's the way we want to move them on that plane. So click the plus button to create that as a orientation setting. Switch to vertices, X-ray on, click and drag, and then bring those down on the local Y, or that normal Y anyway. Just bring them down a little bit. So select these outer ones now. As I'm doing that, I'm looking on the left side to see if that's been rounded off. So something like that. And you can see there I've selected the wrong ones and made a bit of a mess. You need to also select these as well. There we go, all of these, and bring those down. Not too shabby. Give that a little bit more space. We don't want those corners to be too sharp. And again, I'm going to add the orientation there. So let's delete these ones. Don't need those anymore. Create the plus button, click on the plus, and we can use that now to slide those along, which I could have done just by selecting the edge and pressing GG, actually. That's another way to do this. So you can select the vertices as well, press GG. That will also slide them along that edge. So more than one way to do this. As I said earlier, it's all about learning the techniques and the features within Blender. It doesn't have to be about building, a ring or a donut or anything like that. It's what you can learn from this and apply to your own creations. Be creative, right? Do what you want to do and apply the same principles. So let's talk about materials now. Let's switch over to that. And the crystal part is the result I got for the crystal material wasn't as per my test model. So, by the way, before we can move on, download this HDR if you want to use the same one I did. The link's in the description. It's a workshop HDRI. I've used the 2K version for this video. However, use the final 4K version for rendering. So add that to the world, as you see there in the shader editor. And there's the HDRI in the viewport. Let's switch to the render settings and go to film and turn on transparent. We don't need to see the HDRI, but it will still be rendered, of course. Let's switch back to object mode. As I was saying, the crystal part, for some reason, wasn't, even though I duplicated the exact same settings for the shader, it didn't look quite right in this video. So I went back afterwards and amended that and updated the shader slides at the end of the video, where I show you the full node setup. So I encourage you to check those out. Timestamps in the description. So let's start off with the actual ring base, as it were. Now it helps to have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled. So by adding a noise texture, selecting it and pressing Ctrl-T, you will get the texture coordinates and mapping nodes added for you. And change the texture mapping coordinates from, I think it's UV or generated, to object. So let's make these noise textures quite small. So I'll use a scale of 100. I won't talk you through all of these settings because it'll be quite obvious what they do once you see them working. Basically, I'm adding a noise texture into the roughness for the base material. As I mentioned earlier, no wear and tear, no grunge, because this is an alien material which doesn't have those limitations, I guess, or weaknesses. So I'm adding a color ramp just to have more control over this noise texture. I changed the type to constant. And here are the values that I used for the grays. Feel free to use the same or similar ones. So that gives this like a almost, dare I say, stone-like texture, but also metallic. So as I said, alien, who knows what it's made of, right? So maybe someone does know, please let me know in the comments. So yeah, I quite like this kind of simplistic finish. I think it does the job quite well, but we can take it a little bit further. I've added a Musgrave texture, and I'm going to plug that into the normal, and that will make it look terrible, of course. So we need to tell Blender that is actually a bump texture, and we'll switch that to height. That's where it needs to be plugged into. Now the strength is way too much, so let's bring that down. Let's try 1.1 to start off with, and let's look at this Musgrave texture as well, or Musgrave, how you pronounce that, I do not know. Let's try ease. Let's switch to Musgrave. Hold down Control Shift and click, by the way. That's a Node Wrangler feature, and you can see exactly what this node is doing in the viewport. So let's play around with these values a little bit. Again, it's getting some granular detail onto the ring. I quite like this kind of organic shape that we're getting there. Almost as if it's alive. And to be fair, this color ramp doesn't do a huge amount of difference. Obviously, it depends on what you do, but I think in the final result, it was only a subtle difference, really. I just inverted it and closed up some of the gaps. As I say, if you're not keen on that, do what you feel looks good for you. And let's click on this one, Control Shift and click to see how it's working. That's looking good, but the bump is inverted. So let's click on that to invert it back to what I think it should be looking. Let's have a look at the top part as well. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. So subtle, but effective. Again, remember, this is a ring. It's a very small object. It's not going to be seen from a close-up point of view. So, at least the detail is there. If you wanted to zoom in and render it from that perspective, that's fine. So what I'm going to do now is added a mixed shader and an ambient occlusion shader. Now, you don't have to do this, and in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have done this as well, but I did come back and tweak this, as well as the other materials actually, at least slightly from what you see here. So again, I encourage you to jump to the node setups at the end of the video, where you see the final node setups. In fact, they're exactly the same, apart from where I've tweaked some of the values and some of the color ramps. Other than that, they're exactly the same. Just a few tweaks here and there. So I found that the ambient occlusion was a little bit too harsh when it came to the shading, so that's why I made those changes after the fact. No, not a huge deal, but I think it helps with the final render and output. So there's the ambient occlusion working. Now, as I say, in hindsight, this was a little bit too aggressive for my liking when I came to rendering. So I did come back and amend these, as I said. Let's plug that back into the output. I think what I didn't like was, or the problem that I felt didn't help here is, I added a diffuse BSDF just as a, simple solution to adding something for the ambient occlusion. However, I think in hindsight, you could duplicate the principled BSDF you have just there beneath that and tweak some of those values, perhaps the color, and plug that into the second slot of the mix shader. That would probably give you a better result than just using a diffuse with this kind of purpley kind of tone to it. So you can see in those recesses, you've got this kind of purpley, static. You've got this kind of purpley shading going on. Again, I'm trying to think of alien stuff, something that not of this world. So that's where I was going with this. And I'm sure there are better ways to do it. So let's move on to the ring decoration metallic shader. Let's get a nice close-up view of that. Get some space here. Let's select the ring. We can copy and reuse a lot of the stuff we've already done. So we're going to use this bunch. So click and drag to make a selection, Control C or Command C to copy, switch to the decor one and paste. Just reconnect some of these slots up. We don't need the bump, so select those and delete them. We of course need these. Let's plug this into our roughness. There we go. And let's copy the ambient occlusion nodes as well, and the mix shader. So select, copy C, Control V, Control C, if I could say, and paste those in. Let's connect this up, just like that. And this color is slightly blue, so DAE 1DA. So it's white with a slight blue tint, very subtle. Sorry, not blue, green tint to it. Very, very subtle. Cool. Let's move on. Feel the power. I don't do superhero voices. Okay, let's have a look at this inset material. So for this one, I wanted a little bit more detail to contrast with the rather subtle metallic and green metallic. So I'm going to duplicate these nodes from the decor, go to the decor inset, paste these in. And all we need to do now is change the green color, or the color to green. So I've used those values there. So feel free to use the same or do as you please. Not quite there yet. Let's add another Musgrave texture. Let's have a bit more space here actually. We need a bit more to add some more nodes. Like we did before really, it's adding a color ramp. Let's plug in vector coordinates to the vector of the Musgrave. That's better. The idea is here we're going to have this bumpy effect going on just in there. Let's try hybrid. Again, very subtle differences here, but this is the one I was thinking of earlier, where even though I added a color ramp, it didn't make a huge amount of difference to the outcome. So do what you think, do what you feel is good, what you need to do. The goal is to just have a like a random, chaotic looking uneven surface basically. So making those edges a little bit sharper with the color ramp, not much of a difference to be fair. Let's plug that into the normal, and of course we need to tell Blender that is a height map, not a nothing map, which isn't. You can see there, it doesn't quite work. Let's add in a vector bump, drop that in. Strength is way too high, bring that into the height. So that is working. As you can see there, there you go, that's a better angle. But the strength is too much, so let's bring that down to 0.1. Again, just adding a bit more visual interest to parts of the ring. Remember, keep some areas clean, relatively tidy, visually, and other areas, I'm going to say highly detailed or just detailed. So you have that nice contrast from one object to the other. Right, so let's look at this energy thing that I mentioned earlier, which I thought I'd added. Perhaps I didn't. So we're going to hide the crystal so we can get access to this face in the middle of that bowl area, basically. Just there. So in face mode, select this one. In fact, I made this selection grow by clicking Control+. Going to create a new material and assign it, of course. Very important to assign it. You can see there that's now different. In hindsight, that's too much of a selection. Just use the face at the bottom. Doesn't have to be that big. We'll come back and fix that. Oh, that was magic. Delete the principled BSDF and replace it with an emission shader and plug that into the output. Let's use this energy or green color. Let's crank that up to 5. See how that goes. Let's turn on the subdiff again. Re-enable our crystal. Not bad. Perhaps a little bit too strong. So too much. So let's select these faces again. Here. So hold down Alt, click on the edge to make a selection, and assign that ring material again. Not the energy one. So now we have that. I don't mind that it's got these kind of spoke edges because they kind of add to the broken up. Whoa. I feel like saying by the power of Grayskull, but that's a completely different hero when that comes on. Sorry about that. So here's our glass material for the crystal. Now that's pretty good as it is, and it works well. But I wanted a bit more interest to this, a bit more detail, like almost like crystallized, but foggy as well. It was a little bit tedious, to be honest, trying to find the right. I did change the color of the glass, so that's the new value. That helped to make it a little bit more transparent. I just brought down the IOR just a touch. I really like that kind of frosted look that we're getting there. But we can do more. Let's add a layer weight. The idea here is I wanted to keep the outer edges of the crystal pretty much clear, but then as it got more nearer the center, it became much more frosted. I don't know if this was worth it in the end. I think it helped. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can add a bit more detail to this glass, a bit more alien looking. Again, the final shader node setups are at the end of the video. And I really think, having said what I just said, I think it really does help to do this with the glass, because not only do you learn about some of the nodes and how to mix them, but also it certainly does look better than just a plain glass. There's one thing we need to do as well, actually, and that's to create some depth to this glass. At the moment, it's just an empty shell, like an egg. So add a solidify modifier to this. Let's give it some thickness, basically. So I want to make this something like that. I did play around with some of the values here because there were some glitches here and there. That's what I ended up using there. Bring that below the subdivision surface modifier. So the options are used. But something similar to that is absolutely fine. And that again affects how this looks and renders. Let's bring back the ring. By the way, to isolate an object, just press the / key on your keyboard, which should also be the question mark one. That will isolate the object to local view. So anyway, getting back to our crystal. Let's add a layer weight again. and a color ramp and plug this into the factor. Now let's add a Voronoi texture. Just bring it over here in the top left. Copy the color ramp with Shift D. Plug the color into the factor from the Voronoi. And we do need these nodes, so with the Voronoi texture selected, press Ctrl T, plug in Object to Vector, Ctrl Shift and click the color ramp now to see the output of these nodes. So you can see that we're getting this kind of crystallized look design. So let's play around with some of these values. Let's see what these options do. So now we want to mix these to get the final shader that we want. So let's have a look at this Fresnel layer weight and Fresnel effect. So just bring that out, something like that. Again, I'm trying to isolate the center of the glass and the outer edge. So hopefully that's what I'm doing here, and to give us the result that I'm looking for. Let's add a mix shader and plug these into the mix shader there. Before we do that, let's add a mix color, because that needs to be plugged in. These can only be mixed with a color ramp, a color node. Now, this node may look different to your one, because in Blender 3.3 that was called mix color. This one in 3.4 is called mix, and you can change the option to color in the drop down. They do exactly the same thing and work exactly the same way, and they just look a bit different. So if you're not sure or can't find it, just search for mix, not mix color. So with those two plugged in, let's play around with some options, and that looks really cool. Yeah, that's the effect I had in my head going into this. Got this mysterious crystal going on, full of power. Or a doorway to another dimension, who knows? So that's still there, that still works, even though we changed that up. So as you see, I'm playing around with the values here. And again, always an experiment, right? Play around with the options, see what happens, see what works for you. So here are the slides, guys. Pause it on the screen that you want to take a look at. And with that, thank you so much for watching this, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Really helps me out. For now, take care. See you next time.